Some of the biggest stars at the Oscars last night were actually female athletes. And Alyssa Liu, Madison Chalk, Hannah Bilka, and Hilary Knight all showing up at Oscars weekend really highlights one specific thing that has been growing women's sports over the last few years. When we look at the Olympic cycle, we always see major stars come out of those games. But usually that star power ends when the closing ceremony happens. However, that had a seismic shift with Ilona Maher. Ilona Maher was a women's rugby player, and before the Summer Olympics, where she ultimately took home bronze, she was relatively unknown by the general public, and women's rugby was very much not being highlighted. However, as Ilona decided to utilize social media throughout her Olympic Games to highlight her own personality and slowly build her own personal brand, she created a huge amount of buzz for her sport, and she didn't allow that buzz to end after the Olympics. Ilona remained in the spotlight, continuing to do things like Dancing with the Stars and posing for Sports Illustrated. And by doing so, she also helped grow the profile of women's rugby. And now that's a format we're seeing grow multiple women's sports. These four women are undeniably some of the biggest stars of this year's Winter Games, but we're also seeing all of them being willing to become ambassadors for their sport in the mainstream. All of these athletes not only did their normal press tour after winning their medals, they also continued to show up at major pop culture events that wouldn't generally be something you'd expect. Alyssa Liu not only showed up at the Olympics, but also at Paris Fashion Week, and Hilary Knight also made a late night appearance and SNL. And I think the important part about these athletes being willing to become ambassadors for their sport is that as much as we wish female athletes could simply focus on their sport and receive the same amount of attention as male athletes do, the reality is that's not the case. And what we're seeing instead is multiple female athletes being willing to put their kind of star power and personality forward, create their own narrative, and cross over into the mainstream of pop culture. And in doing so, create a personal connection that brings new fans to their sport. Team USA women's hockey, for example, has had one of the biggest benefits from the Olympics. Not only is Hilary Knight becoming a recognizable name in the mainstream, but we're also seeing ticket sales in the US grow exponentially. They're selling out stadiums like Madison Square Garden, TD Garden, and Climate Pledge Arena. And the league will have their first nationally broadcast game this year. And a lot of that is from a willingness to stay in that spotlight, even if it's uncomfortable. And the importance really comes from this idea of star power. For so long, the argument has been that women's sports are not marketable. But with the change of social media and a large trend that was arguably started by Ilona Maher, we're seeing female athletes create their own star power and then prove to other people that they are so beyond marketable that they can't be ignored. I think when we talk about the growth of women's sports, especially over the last couple of years, it's important to acknowledge that a lot of it was self-started. Women have been competitive and marketable since the dawn of women's sports, but with a few women who are willing to put themselves online and do something in addition to being great at their sport, we're seeing the results of those women making it clear that you can't ignore their marketability. And I think the Oscars, being one of the biggest celebrations of pop culture as a whole, is a true marker of not only how competitive and exciting women's sports are, but how much they have taken over the mainstream in a way that no one believed they could.